From the 1970s to the 1980s, the so-called golden age of serial killers, in Anchorage, Alaska, people know that Robert Hansen took women to the wilderness and shot them like caribou. But in Fairbanks, 360 miles away, another serial killer almost disappeared from the history of crime. He was a technical sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, brazen enough to choose his hunting grounds right near the base where he lived and worked. In less than 2 years, he killed at least 5 young women and girls, the youngest one just 11 years old. His name was Thomas Bunday. He never stood trial. In March 1983, after partially confessing to investigators, he rode his motorcycle head-on into a truck and ended his own life. However, many details, including whether he had more victims, remains an unsolved mystery. On September 28, 1948, Thomas was born in Nashville, Tennessee, the younger of 2 children, and his father was a World War II veteran. In those years, countless veterans returned home carrying untreated trauma, and his father was one of them. From childhood on, Thomas had a terrible relationship with his father. The man suffered from mental disorders and often beat both his wife and Thomas. That childhood trauma left Thomas with wounds that would never heal. Later, in 1963, when his father died, 15-year-old Thomas refused to attend his funeral and ran away from home for several days. No one knew where he went, but the reason was probably simple enough. He had no interest in pretending to grieve for a man who had terrified him throughout his childhood. In 1966, after graduation, he married his high school girlfriend. 1 year into the marriage, he joined the U.S. Air Force and was serving in Southeast Asia. At that time, Thomas, like a lot of young men, thought he would finish his service, go home, and build a normal life with the woman he loved. But while he was serving in Southeast Asia, unable to be with his wife, she gave birth to a son, not his, fathered by another man. When he heard the news, Thomas did not file for divorce. He stayed, trying to patch together a marriage that was almost falling apart, and he even raised the child as his own. Later, his wife had a daughter with him, but once trust was broken, there was no fixing it. In the mid-70s, Thomas was transferred to Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks, Alaska, where the winters are long and dark. Having been beaten by his father as a child and betrayed by his wife as an adult, Thomas had long since lost any ability to cope with pain in healthy ways. Over the next few years, his mental state deteriorated. The signs of emotional exhaustion became harder and harder to ignore, and he even started seeing a psychiatrist. But by then, it was already too late. On August 29, 1979, a 19-year-old Fairbanks resident named Glinda Sodeman disappeared. 2 months later, a boy hunting in the woods near Moose Creek, close to Eielson Air Force Base, found a woman's body. Aside from a single .38 caliber shell casing, nothing else was found at the scene. The autopsy confirmed it was Sodeman. She had not been sexually assaulted. She had been strangled and then shot in the back of the head. While police were still working the Sodeman case, a second disappearance came on June 13, 1980. 11-year-old Doris Aring from North Pole, Alaska, had vanished. But unlike the Sodeman investigation, which had gone nowhere, this one gave them something. Not long after Doris vanished, police found her bicycle in a ditch. More importantly, her brother said that in the days before she disappeared, he had seen her talking to a stranger who was wearing an Air Force uniform and sitting in a blue car. 6 months later, when police still did not know whether Doris was alive or dead, 2 more women vanished from the Fairbanks area. On January 31, 1981, 21-year-old Marlene Peters disappeared while hitchhiking from Fairbanks to Anchorage. 5 weeks after that, 16-year-old Wendy Wilson had also vanished. As the number of victims grew, the Alaska State Troopers, the Fairbanks Police Department, the North Pole Police Department, and the FBI formed a joint task force to investigate. 3 days after Wendy went missing, her body was found. Marlene's badly decomposed remains turned up not far from Wendy's. Like the others, both women had been strangled and shot, with no sign of sexual assault. At that time, investigators were completely stuck. These crimes followed no pattern, and the remains just kept coming. About a month later, the 5th victim turned up, 18-year-old Lori King. This time, investigators committed every available resource, launching a joint military and civilian search effort that continued for weeks. Their efforts yielded nothing. Then, in October 1981, several servicemen hunting in the woods near Eielson Air Force Base discovered Lori's rotting body. The autopsy showed the same thing: strangled, then shot, with no sign of sexual assault. At this point, investigators finally began to suspect the killer might be in the military. Every body that had been found was dumped along remote roads, gravel pits, and wooded areas near Eielson. Only someone familiar with those areas would use them as disposal sites. So they went back through the files and checked every person assigned to Eielson, including the employees employed as civilian specialists. By February 1982, 3 names had been added to the suspect list. One of them was Thomas. He owned a blue car and a white pickup, matching the witness description perfectly. He also had a record of multiple misconduct incidents on base, and several female coworkers had filed complaints about inappropriate sexual comments and harassment. But without direct evidence, and since Thomas had been transferred to Shepherd Air Force Base in September 1981, so the investigation was forced into a standstill. Almost a year later, in November 1982, Alaska investigators got a call from Henrietta, Texas. A woman named Cassandra Goodwin had been found dead there, killed in the same manner as the 5 victims in Alaska. The case broke the stalemate. After Thomas left Alaska for Texas, no more murders occurred in Alaska. Then an identical murder surfaced at his new posting. A few months later, after interstate coordination, investigators arrived in Texas in March 1983. On March 3rd, Thomas was brought in for questioning. Investigators interrogated him about the 5 Alaska murders and the one in Texas. Each session lasted several hours. At first, Thomas refused to answer directly. He stonewalled them for nearly a week. On the 3rd day, he even handed them a note. "I really like you guys and have enjoyed talking with you, but I did not do these things." Several days later, investigators got a search warrant. After searching his house and the trunk of his car, they found physical evidence that directly tied him to the 5 murders. Shell casings linked to the cases, newspaper clippings about the murders, and Wendy's hair. Once he learned the evidence had been found, Thomas's attitude shifted. He began confessing, admitted he had killed those girls in Alaska, describing the murders in detail. When asked why he had systematically strangled and shot young women he did not even know, he cited psychological problems and sexual complexes as motives for committing the murders. The abuse he suffered as a child had left Thomas consumed by enormous rage and helplessness for years, and the betrayal and humiliation in his marriage had further destroyed his dignity as a man, leaving him unable to control his aggressive impulses. In the end, he targeted young women, killing them by strangulation and shooting. But when asked about Cassandra's murder, he flatly denied it. Even though Thomas had confessed, jurisdiction issues meant the Alaskan investigators had no authority to arrest him in Texas. They could only keep him under surveillance until the warrant was issued, to prevent him from fleeing or going into hiding. On March 15, 1983, Alaska authorities issued a warrant for Thomas's arrest. But he managed to slip away from surveillance. Then he got on his motorcycle, rode onto the highway, and, about 40 miles outside Wichita Falls, swerved into oncoming traffic at 100 miles an hour, crashing head-on into a truck and killing himself instantly. He refused to be arrested, refused to stand in court and face trial, was unwilling to face justice for the things that he had done. He decided to end everything on his own way. The whereabouts of Doris's body and whether there were more victims became mysteries that died with him. It was not until August 1986 that Doris's remains were found. Like the other victims, she had a bullet hole in her skull. The location was that same remote woodland near Eielson Air Force Base. Later, investigators realized it was no accident that Thomas had dumped the remains near the base. His job gave him access to security cameras overlooking those areas, letting him revisit his crimes over and over. And the reason he refused to admit killing Cassandra was most likely to avoid the death penalty. Alaska did not have capital punishment. Even if he had been sentenced to death there, it would not have been carried out. But, in the end, his death rendered all of it moot.